Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. It's Easter weekend, so let's get started with some news, maybe some Easter eggs. Let's see. First things first, from the SAP side of the house, I have one blog post that I would like to present you by Christian Michel. It's not really a blog post, it's basically one big infographic, but I think that is really useful about scenarios, use cases around the business technology platform, grouped by different, let's say, topics like user experience, integration, analytics, and guides you through different scenarios and services that you can use in order to give life to them. And then there's also, of course, a big link to the SAP Discovery Center that gives you more information about the services and about the scenarios that you can implement there. I think a really useful overview, quite nice sketch. If you want to have that in high resolution, go down to the comments of the blog post and you will find the reference to that one, because the SAP community blog post area kind of reduces the resolution of the image. Now with that, let's switch to Azure, and here especially to the serverless area. And there is a new video up by the serverless live coding sessions by Shrey, where Jonah and I had again the honor to be guests, and it's the raw uncut version of how we struggle with calling the face API of the cognitive services in order to have the emotional analysis of a face, of a picture of a face. Well, as I saw, it's uncut. Have fun. You will have fun, definitely, because it's incredible how 3 people can struggle with calling such an API. Nevertheless, we made it at the end as a little spoiler. Then another news from the serverless area, Azure Functions namely, and the Azure Functions table storage bindings. A blog post by Mark Heath guiding you through how to update your Azure Functions to the latest and greatest v4 with .NET 6, and what you then have to do if you have a storage or a table storage binding, because there are some changes there, especially for the NuGet package. So that's a completely different one now, not extensions storage, but extensions tables. And then the blog post also guides you through what you have to do beside that adoption to get your code running. Very useful, I think, very common scenario to have table storage and Azure Functions together. So if you're using .NET, take a look at that one. Then 2 more hidden news from the GitHub world, or from the GitHub repositories and durable functions. As you know, there are new durable function storage providers available, and Netherite and MS SQL. And if you were watching the repositories, there have been 2 news this week. Netherite got a new release tagged release candidate 1, which means Netherite will soon go GA. And yesterday, MS SQL as a storage provider followed up and also brought a new release tagged version 1 release candidate. So I'm quite happy to see how things evolve, and when those 2 things get GA, I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, let's see. Then from the world of serverless, let's switch to containers, Kubernetes, but starting with, let's say, serverless containers, namely Azure Container Apps. And there is now an enhancement of the official documentation, which talks about health probes in Azure Container Apps. We had a blog post about that one, I think 2 weeks ago. And now the official documentation caught up with what the community already did, namely how to do health probes in Azure Container Apps. Then another feature from the Azure Container Apps that's caught in a blog post by Philipp Bauknecht about how to use manage identities in Azure Container Apps. Also a great feature that you certainly want to use, and this blog post guides you through on how to do that with an ASP.NET Core app. And last but not least, also from the world of Azure Container Apps, there is now public preview of the Visual Studio Code extension for Azure Container Apps. So with this news coming together, a lot of puzzle pieces are now falling into place that have been well expected from my perspective in the Azure Container Apps area. And I think we are also nearing the GA of Azure Container Apps, which I'm also looking forward to. So great news one day before Easter Sunday. And with that, let's switch to hardcore Kubernetes. One blog post that I would like to highlight is about Istio and OAuth proxy in Kubernetes in order to establish microservice authentication. This is kind of from my perspective, quite usual setup. So you have Istio, you have OAuth proxy, you have DAX, and this blog post guides you through on how to set things up and how to establish the authentication within your cluster between the microservices. Super useful, definitely worth the read. Then from the broader ecosystem, first of all, there is a KEDA community now available on Twitter. I've referenced the link to the community in the show notes, so you can directly jump there. It, I think, has potential to grow. As of now, when I record this video, there are 31 members on it. So I think there could be more. And also from the broader Kubernetes ecosystem, on one blog post that I missed last week about Dapper and how Dapper helped a company called Daedalus on accelerating their development on AWS and Azure. So you have a multi-cloud scenario, which focuses, I think it was messaging and state management, if I'm not completely wrong. So I think that's the foremost thing that I did. Was really interesting to see how they leverage Dapper. Again, another great source of inspiration, what can be done with Dapper. Now, with that, let's switch to DevOps and GitHub. And there I have really a lot of news this week. Starting first with DevOps per se. If you want to get into that topic, I have referenced a super cool GitHub repository from my perspective by Michael Cade about 90 days of DevOps. So it's one of this n number of days challenges where you can walk through, and within this 90-day challenge, you will run through a lot of areas that I think are very valuable for you. In general, what is DevOps? So more the theory behind that, and a little bit of Linux basics, networking, cloud providers with bias towards Microsoft, Azure, which I can live with, and then also topics like containers, Kubernetes, of course, infrastructure as code, automation, CI/CD pipelines, and so on and so forth. So really great source for learning if you want to get started with that area. Then moving one step further, there was one super cool talk, really a great talk by Anaya Kammer from InnoQ about GitOps, talking about what is GitOps, what are pitfalls with GitOps, and what are misunderstandings that come along with GitOps. Really definitely worth watching, as most of the InnoQ technology launches from my perspective. Gives you great insights and great ideas around GitOps. And then kind of a lucky thing, there is also perfectly fitting to GitOps, a new video by Anais Urlichs about the full GitOps tutorial and getting started with Fluxcity. So picking up this topic of GitOps that was explained more in general by the InnoQ technology launch, this video that now focuses on how to really do things, making use of Fluxcity as one, I would say, de facto standard operator for GitOps in Kubernetes. That's really cool. Then another announcement by Microsoft, also falling in the area of DevOps, talking about the issues that you have or that arise when you combine Azure with Terraform. So Terraform, I think, is one of the standard infrastructure as code providers. Very well adopted. And there are some shortcomings when you combine those two worlds. And Microsoft is aware of that, and it also openly, and that's what I like about the blog post, tells what are the issues there and why are they there. And then presenting two new tools that are available in public preview called Azure Terrafy and AZ API Terraform Provider, which should mitigate the issues that currently are there when you combine Azure with Terraform. So, I mean, it's doable. It's all okay-ish when you use it, but there are some downsides. And it seems that these downsides now get mitigated. So if you're using HashiCorp Terraform with Azure, that's definitely a blog post that you should take a look at. If you're using Bicep, there is also an update on the Bicep site that was published this week on the Bicep repository. And I've referenced the repository, and there is now a Bicep public registry, which is a central repository for the supported modules that you can use within your Bicep projects. And I think that's also quite useful, nice extension, and that's why I highlighted it. And then let's switch to GitHub. First things first, there is a blog post about a security alert, and that's really important. There are stolen OAuth user tokens out there, and they are issued to third-party integrators, namely Heroku and Travis CI. So if you have integrated GitHub with Heroku and Travis CI via OAuth, it is very likely that your organization's GitHub repository and your NPM repositories got compromised. This blog post guides you through what's the issue, what's the impact, how GitHub responded to that, and what you need to know and what you need to do if you are subject to that security alert. So not that good news for this weekend, but important to know. Then, sticking to the topic of security, Dependabot got a new enhancement around surfacing security issues or security vulnerabilities in your code. It can now also highlight within your code functions that you call that are vulnerable. And it will bring that to your attention via the usual Dependabot alerts. But that's now really new. It's not only, let's say, packages, but it's really diving or bringing you into the exact place in your code where you have an issue. Then another security-related functionality that GitHub brings up, it's doing secret scanning and detecting username and passwords within your GitHub repository, so usernames and passwords towards GitHub. And if it detects something like that, for example, in the metadata of something that you push to GitHub, then it will reset your password and will email you. So that's quite useful. Then some non-security related features that are worth mentioning from my perspective. One very nice feature is you can now delete branches with open pull requests on them. Up to now, you had to close all the pull requests manually and then could delete the branch. That's now a one-click action. However, the pull requests will be closed. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. But you can do that now with a one-click action. I've referenced all the information in the show notes. Then another functionality around, let's say, branch protection settings. And there is a new branch protection setting now available called require deployments to succeed before merging. And what this thing does is it makes sure that a successful deployment of a branch took place before its pull requests can be merged. I think a very useful extension for real life scenarios where you have such a staging process along different development or along different environments, deployment environments like development, staging, production, for example. Then GitHub discussions also got some updates, and the blog post that highlights them is referenced in the show notes. So you have now organizations discussions. So that's something that I have presented, I think, a few weeks ago, where you can leverage discussions within your organization. So to keep things a bit better together. Then you also have polls now within your discussions. That's really cool. So you can do polls which allow you great interaction. Integration is the topic of the next section. You can integrate discussions with Slack and Microsoft Teams. So that's also something that I think is quite useful. And there are also some other, nice little enhancements around surfacing answers in discussions, for example. Yeah, so what's left from GitHub? One more announcement that I would like to bring to your attention. There is now the possibility to reuse assignments for GitHub Classrooms. So if you're using GitHub Classrooms, you can now reuse existing assignments. Now, if you do not know about GitHub Classrooms, like me before I saw that one, that looks like a quite cool functionality for training folks. And I've referenced the official documentation also in the show notes for GitHub Classrooms if you want to dive into that one, because I think that's really, really useful. And I do not know why I missed that. But maybe you are in the same situation, so time to catch up. Then from the broader Microsoft ecosystem, two news. First thing around Cosmos DB and around the autoscale. So the request units that you have to define for autoscaling have now been lowered. So the, let's say, minimum scale range was 400 to 4,000 request units per second that you had to define. And Cosmos DB then automatically scales the throughput depending on your demand. This was now reduced to 100 to 1,000, which will also brings in some cost advantages. So that's a great announcement. And then another blog post about a scenario that I think is also quite common and highlights how you can secure APIs on Azure behind API management by combining Microsoft Identity with the Azure API management. So Azure Active Directory. And this blog post guides you through that, how you can do that without basically doing any code development, how you can secure that. I think very, very useful. Then, three news from the area of .NET. First of all, the NuGet area. It has some enhancement with NuGet 6.2 around the central package management. So the blog post that I've referenced guides you through what changes or what you can do in order to make your central package management go, and how to use it with respect to the versioning and how you have to structure all the dependencies. I think quite useful extension as far as I saw. Then .NET 7 coming out this autumn has a new preview release, Preview 3. I've referenced the corresponding announcement blog post in the show notes, guiding you through what has changed and what has been improved, what issues have been fixed with this new preview. Then, as .NET 7 is arriving at the end of this year, .NET 5 is reaching its end of support, and that's happening in May. It's the 8th of May 2022. Where .NET 5 will reach its official end of support. So there will be, after the update that will happen in May, there will be no longer any security updates or something like that for .NET 5. So you should switch to .NET 6. That is especially important if you jumped on the train of .NET 5 for Azure Functions. There you really have to switch then, because functionality will no longer be available. Then, switching from Microsoft to the world in between SAP and Microsoft, and of course, as every week, there is the SAP on Azure video podcast, this time covering the very interesting topic of how RISE with SAP is connected to SAP on Azure. So I think that's really something worth taking a look at, and again, having a look behind the curtains, what's happening and how those two things work together. And then another, I think, very useful GAM, little technical blog post around Azure Logic Apps. Although it's very short and concise, I think it's super useful. It's about stateful sessions calling Azure Logic Apps from SAP. So if you call a Logic App from SAP, so a non-SAP system, you usually have the issue that you cannot have state there. Now, with the .NET SAP connector library, you can. And this blog post by David Burke guides you through how to do that. Now, with that, let's switch to the area of learning. There I have, first of all, one, let's say, series that starts from Learn Live by Microsoft around Azure Hybrid, especially Azure Arc, starting with an introduction to Azure Arc that was live streamed this week, and that will have several follow-up editions, of course, diving deeper into Azure Arc. So if you are interested in that hybrid world, I think that's definitely worth watching. And then another blog post, I think, again, very interesting insight on how GitHub engineering works internally and how they tweak their performance of GitHub with respect to one very specific scenario and how they how they improve performance and what they did and how they decided what to do exactly. That's part of this blog post. It's, well, GitHub specific, of course, because it only touches the GitHub topics, but I think you can drag out quite some information about, well, more general aspects. How do I deal with performance bottlenecks? What can I do? How can I approach such a topic from a more generic perspective? So that's why I put that one into the learning area. I think also quite useful. Then a follow-up of Golo Roden's video of last week, where which I also had on this podcast, around why the native web, so the company that Golo runs, is moving or expanding their portfolio to Go from a pure TypeScript JavaScript area. And this now half-hour video goes more into the depth of their decision process. So what were their criteria to bring in a new language? What has the new language to fulfill? And not only the language, but the ecosystem around that. Why were some languages excluded? What was kind of the top 3 languages that might be handy? And then why finally they decided for Go. Very interesting from my perspective. Definitely worth watching. And then last thing for today, for this session, developer experience and efficiency, blog post by Tobias Zimmergren around Visual Studio Code extensions. Of course, always useful and always good to see what other people use. Maybe you know most of them, like the bracket pair colorizer. That's something that's, I think, quite heavily used. Prettier, also something that most of you probably know. CodeSnap is something that might not be that well known. And there is one thing that I came across that I will definitely try out, and that's Indent Rainbow. So how to visualize your indented lines. That's really interesting blog post. I think if you are looking for extensions that might be useful, definitely worth to take a look at. Yeah, and with that, I'm at the end of today's session. I hope I had some news for you, some interesting stuff to catch up, to read over the prolonged Easter weekend, if you have one. With that, I wish you a great Saturday, a very, very happy, sunny Easter Sunday. Hope you catch some chocolate and some eggs. Great next week, successful next week, and see you next Saturday. Until then, bye.